Pep Guardiola finally secured a Champions League trophy with Man City, and we're going to have a look at how he did that. So we're starting here in the first minute. Generally speaking, Inter built up with a 3-1 with Çalhanoğlu and Barella pushing higher, typically alternating these higher and lower positions, up against what was often a 4-4-2 shape with one of the wide midfielders, typically near side, pressing towards a centre-back and eventually towards far side of touchline. On this occasion, Acerbi has pushed out, but what Inter are looking for is to get Onana on the ball and utilize his distribution into the wing-backs, typically DeMarco on the left-hand side, because Dumfries was pushing up into a right-wing position, or alternatively, Onana could play longer, whether it's into one of the two wide centre midfielders or even into Dzeko or Martinez, after having forced their press higher up the pitch. And now they can look to try and take advantage of the fact that Man City's defenders are trying to press behind the forwards. And so we see that, for example, with Ake's position here. And note the clever positions of those wide centre midfielders, which makes it difficult for the likes of Gundogan, etc., to be able to stay with their players. They all have to kind of take half positions. Unfortunately, on this occasion, the ball is poor, but we can see supporting runners here. We've got Çalhanoğlu, we've got Martinez. Before we move on from here, I think it's good to also mention the movement. One would drop short and then the other would try and run in behind to try and create a little bit of confusion for the Man City backline, where they're trying to man mark, but then they also have wing back to contest with as well, and their wide midfielders. So as we see here with Bernardo Silva, and we'd see on the far side with Jack Grealish, are really high and can't provide cover. Where I mentioned earlier Onana playing it long into Dzeko or Martinez, I should also mention he could play it long into Dumfries, where he kind of narrowed into a right centre forward position at times too. Man City have their throw in, they lose possession, and Inter try to counter-attack, which is one of many. And now we get to see those runs that I mentioned by the centre forwards. We don't have one dropping off here, but we have both of them being engaged. Martinez running through the centre, whilst Dzeko is running out to create that opportunity for his strike partner. Two key players to watch in this transition were Çalhanoğlu and Barella, especially Çalhanoğlu, who was clever in finding his way from being a second CDM into this number 8 role without being tracked. After Dzeko's little slip up, Man City get to build up in this 3-1 shape, and then these three higher players forming a diamond with Rodri. And what they were trying to look for was, just as Inter were utilising their goalkeeper's distribution, Man City were looking for Ederson or the defenders to be able to play longer balls out into quasi left wing or left back or right back position, where the number 8s in De Bruyne, Gundogan, Stones could pull out into, although this was made really difficult by Inter Milan's man marking. I should also mention that Ederson could play as like a second centre-back on a few occasions, obviously the benefit being it makes the press more difficult, but as we saw with Barella almost taking advantage with a long shot, it does leave you a little bit open. Ederson tries to ping the ball out. This intensity for Inter Milan's press throughout the game was crucial, and that leads us to here, where we've got Stones pulling back from that right back, right wing quasi position I was mentioning, and now we're getting De Bruyne trying to do the same on the opposite side. As the ball's been played over to Ake, Inter are able to settle, and we get to see some of that man marking, and with that we get to see Ederson push out into that second centre-back position, creating that 4-1 shape, making it significantly more difficult for Inter to be able to press aggressively without being picked off. And then Ederson plays a longer ball here. And I think this is just an exhibition of how important the goalkeeper's distribution was this game, as well as also their choices. And in the air, Inter were indomitable. Inter managed to regain possession, and we see them retreat to essentially a 3-1 or a 3-2 shape. Moving on to the 10th minute, I think this is a really great example of Inter Milan's 3-1 build-up, where they're able to create a favourable transition. Another example of this is also in the 38th minute. We get to see some of that measured build-up here, with the wing backs pushed high, one at left wing and one at right forward, against Man City's 4-2-4 shape with very high wide midfielders. And so Inter drew Man City high up the pitch, creating this switching opportunity, allowing Inter to be able to exploit the high positions of their wing backs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, just notice Çalhanoğlu's position here. At this point, he poses no danger, although he does, as well as Barella does, cause a little bit of an issue for the fullbacks because they can't commit to pressing the wing backs, and so have to take these kind of defensive half positions rather than man mark them. And then we get to see this nice transition. through the midfield. Get to see Çalhanoğlu having ran from deeper into this really great position beyond the Man City press as Gundogan and Rodri are forced to cover after the switch. And also just note Dumfries' position basically as a right winger, a right forward at this point, eventually leading to Inter Milan's kind of signature move where they have the left wing back crossing and then they have a number of players contesting in the box. One more thing I want to add to this is if Inter build up into this position and they can sustain it here, they will occasionally have Bastoni or whoever's playing as that left centre-back underlap or overlap to create another potential crossing angle. Conversely, this is an example of inter-pressing and man-marking intensely to try and force an error out of Man City in Man City's defensive third. And then numerous other occasions, there was the 8th minute, 47th, 54th, 77. Continuing from the Manchester City free kick, we have this 5-3-2 or 5-2-3 pressing shape. So we've had rotation here by Lautaro and Edin Dzeko, with Dzeko expected to press towards Kanji and Barella towards Ake, whilst also covering passes into Rodri here. Extra note on Barella and Çalhanoğlu's roles. They both press, mark, and kind of cover a CDM. So for example, Çalhanoğlu here is CDM, but then he's expected to cover passes into John Stones, as well as also sometimes come narrower to prevent passes into Rodri as Edin Dzeko pushes higher to Kanji. But then on the right-hand side, Barella is also expected to sometimes drop into that CDM role, protect against Rodri receiving passes, and then if Dumfries is able to jump onto De Bruyne, he'll be expected to go and press towards Ake. So their decision-making during the press is really important, of course combined with good communication. And so we see on this occasion, as the ball is passed into Ake, we're getting that jump. We're not seeing Dumfries pushing higher because he's marking Grealish. Instead, Darmian tracking De Bruyne, whilst then Barella can go out towards Ake. And due to the intensity of the Inter defense and midfield's press or man marking, City, when they played it out into those fullback positions with those number 8s, they would be forced into playing those early first-time balls around the corner into Haaland, who would then be looking for his wide midfielders to be running beyond him for him to just flick the ball onto. Alternatively, you could have Gundogan, Stones, or De Bruyne close to him as well for him to lay off to. We have this scenario in the 86th minute. It shows how Inter managed to create those waves of attacks late in the game as they sought an equaliser. After the throw-in, they take advantage of Onana's high position to play through the lines into Lukaku dropping. This with a midfield now of Brozovic, Mkhitaryan, and Barella, with most of the subs doing similar roles really. So for example, Mkhitaryan is doubling up as a CDM with Brozovic, and Bellanova is essentially doing the same role as Dumfries. Unfortunately, this attack comes to naught. But a minute later, we get to see the same situation with Onana high in a centre-back role again, making Man City's 4-2-4 press essentially null and void. But fortunately for Man City, they're able to regain possession. And then let's quickly go back to the 5th minute where Man City are able to pin Inter back. Essentially, Inter end up in what's meant to be a 5-3-2 shape, with their centre forwards also dropping back to make sure there's no easy shots on the edge of the box or cutbacks to the edge of the box. Then we're getting a lot of Man City players positioning to contest across from either Bernardo Silva cutting inside or De Bruyne overlapping to his favourite position. Not also Ake's position, to counter press or contest any balls that fall to the edge of the box. Next, I just wanted to point out Inter had the option of a long throw-in, although they only had one occasion to use it. And then briefly, we have this scenario in the 32nd minute with Inter Milan set up in that 3-1 or 3-2 shape against the 4-2-4 again, with clever position being picked up by Barella outside of Dumfries, making him difficult to mark and a great option for a switch. But Inter choose to drop deep to draw out the Man City press, to create difficulties for the Man City defense who wanted to man mark but would struggle against the positioning of those wide centre midfielders, wing backs, and also a floating centre forward between the lines. And then moving on to the 62nd minute, we still got that 3 with a 2 ahead of them, with Çalhanoğlu and then later Mkhitaryan expected to stay deeper more often, what with the subs. So for example, having Lukaku and Barella staying up as more of a third forward. And just with that earlier 32nd minute, we've got Inter trying to trigger Man City into pressing higher up the pitch and creating those spaces that Inter want to exploit. But then also note on this occasion too, Dumfries sneaking his way higher up on that right-hand side. Next, I wanted to touch on the corner kicks. They did have a bit of variation. They pulled them back. to a player on the edge of the box and then whip them in. They were often flat and aimed either at the near post or the far post. And with that, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, consider sharing it on social media, hitting the like button and subscribing. And with that, we're out.